its greatest impact, the impact of this rule, in my judgment, will be on rollovers, IRAs, and wealth management from 401k plans.
This is 401k Specialist Editor-in-Chief Brian Anderson, and this is the 401k Specialist Podcast. The eyes of the retirement industry remain tightly focused on the Department of Labor's new fiduciary rule, which is currently set to become effective in September, provided it survives some pending challenges to its legality. Assuming it survives the challenges, the final rule would mean some big changes for the retirement industry, from advisors to plan sponsors and plan participants. We're going to talk about some of these potential changes and check in with what else is new with today's special guest right after this brief message.
Let's face it, retirement planning can be confusing. At Jackson, we're working to make retirement clear for everyone, starting with you. Our easy-to-understand resources and user-friendly digital tools help simplify your entire experience. You can have confidence in your retirement with clarity from Jackson. Seek that clarity you deserve at jackson.com. Jackson is short for Jackson Financial Incorporated, Jackson National Life Insurance Company, Lansing, Michigan, and Jackson National Life Insurance Company of New York, Purchase, New York.
There's still plenty of uncertainty around the DOL's final fiduciary rule and what it will mean for the retirement industry. To discuss some of the changes and the challenges facing the rule, we're happy to have Jerry Schlichter, founder and managing partner of St. Louis-based law firm Schlichter Bogard LLC, and of course famous for his success in pioneering claims of excessive fees in defined contribution plans. Welcome to the 401k Specialist Podcast, Jerry.
Thank you, Brian. Happy to be here.
All right, before we start talking about some of the key changes once the final rule becomes effective in September, I first want to get your take on a couple of the legal challenges to the rule that have surfaced in recent weeks. First, we had the lawsuit from the Federation of Americans for Consumer Choice, a group seeking a preliminary injunction against it and ultimately seeking to strike it down. And then we had 9 more insurance trade groups file another suit that accuses the rule of being contrary to law, arbitrary and capricious, and ultimately unconstitutional. These suits seem to be saying the new rule is nothing more than a retread version of the DOL's 2016 rule, which was ultimately vacated by the courts back in 2018. What are your thoughts on the prospects of these new challenges?
Well, in a word, it's impossible to say with any kind of certainty for anyone what's going to happen with the legal challenges. Certainly, the Department of Labor spent an enormous amount of time and got tremendous input from everyone in the industry who wanted to weigh in and who might be affected. And it certainly also is within the power of the DOL to address how advice is given in regard to investment in retirement assets under ERISA. So that's a broad power, and certainly the rule is broad, but no one can say what those prospects are. I think it's likely that there will not be a resolution even in the lower courts before the effective date on September 24th.
All right. Assuming the new rule does indeed become effective as scheduled in September, can you go over what you see as some of the most impactful changes in terms of new protections for retirement investors?
Yes, as I said, it's very broad, Brian, in terms of its applicability to advisors and the definition of who an advisor is, as well as to what advice is entailed. So as to who is an advisor, anyone who is advising or making recommendations about retirement assets is covered by the rule. That could be advice about IRAs, wealth management, but also things such as fixed annuities, whether those annuities or whether those assets are currently in a retirement plan or not, securities, or even real estate, if the assets to fund that investment would be in a retirement plan. It also would apply to record keepers and other service providers to plans who get involved in making recommendations. But beyond that, a change is that it applies also to insurance agents who not typically, but who have not been covered by ERISA and now will be if they're giving advice about retirement assets. So, for example, an independent insurance agent, and there are over 10,000 of them, as well as agents who work directly for companies. If that agent is telling people to put money into, say, an insurance product that would be retirement assets, they're covered. That agent is covered. And the standard under ERISA for an advisor, as most advisors know, is higher than, it's the highest standard under the law. It's higher than what is applicable to insurance agents now, which is governed by 50 different states' insurance commissioners under what's called the NAIC, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. So it's a sea change for insurance agents. And in addition, the coverage of the advice uniquely also applies to advisors who advise plan sponsors, which is a change. And that's also a good thing for retirees and American workers, because plan sponsors now have a right to rely on advice that's given about their participants' retirement assets. And they've got a right to rely on that advice being in their participants' best interest, not advice that would expose the sponsor to litigation, for example, for excessive fees or imprudent investments. So that's a new area that has not been involved and that advisors should be well aware of.
I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on what some of the steps that retirement plan advisors and plan sponsors should be taking now to prepare for compliance with the new rule?
Yes, but before that, let me go back to the impact as a whole at a high level. Its greatest impact, the impact of this rule, in my judgment, will be on rollovers, IRAs, and wealth management from 401k plans. That must now be in the best interest of the participant or the advisee, and that is different from how things have been done before. So that's probably by far the most impact because it would affect the most transactions and the biggest amount of assets. So to answer your question about steps that should be taken, my recommendation to any advisor is immediately begin preparation now. Do not wait. Do not assume that the law is going to be stricken as the prior fiduciary rule was. And even if it were stricken, this is not going to end with the district courts, the federal court, lower courts. This will be, and whatever happens, will be appealed to courts of appeal. And that process can be a year and a half or 2 years. And it could even end up in the U.S. Supreme Court. So the path for finality is long. But it goes into effect on September 24th. And what that means is that advisors and plan sponsors should now begin the preparation. They should begin preparing the procedures, the materials, the education process of their staff and employees about the difference in the standard, the changes needed, and implement that training. And it should be taken very seriously. So what that also means is that in each item of advice, the advisor must develop an investor profile for that specific person, looking at his or her assets, age, inclination about investments, and so on. They must also tell the person, if it's a participant, about the cost, the investment prudence, and the services that are provided by whoever the provider of the investment would be. They've got to discuss that in some detail with the advisee. And then they have to discuss what their recommendation is going to be and why this is in the best interest of the advisee that they will be proposing. So it's a thorough analysis of the individual circumstances of the advisee in each case that must be prepared. And in doing that, to prepare for that individual advice, the advisor should be gathering information, analyzing investments and recommendations that he or she intends to make. A bottom line sort of beacon, I would say, for an advisor to follow is from the language in the preamble to the rule. And that's this. If I can't recommend a product, be it an annuity or an IRA or wealth management, if I can't recommend a product that's better than what the person currently have, then I should not recommend it. It's that simple. And that beacon will answer a lot of questions.
Great. It's also been said plan sponsors are going to need to be alert to any additional changes, may have to review all of their existing educational resources to ensure they don't dip into the realm of advice. How serious is this concern?
It should be taken very seriously. And there's certainly a tension between pure objective education and advice. And, you can't just, it would be not be wise for them to sort of wink, wink, nod, nod. Okay, this is really education. We can call it that, but we're pushing a particular investment or framing the language in a way that it turns into really a recommendation or a favoring of a particular investment rather than generic educational materials. So my advice would be avoid the temptation to cut corners or call recommendations educational. Face it head on. If you're going to recommend something, embrace the rule and follow it. Because at the end of the day, people, whether it be a participant or even a plan sponsor, are assuming that, well, they have all along assumed that the advice would be in their best interest. But now more than ever, they have a right to assume that. And if that's done, if they trust the advisor, they're still going to largely follow that advice. So they're not going to necessarily lose business because they try to cover it with educational overview. It's really the bottom line of a recommendation. And if you do that, you should take it seriously.
Great. I want to shift gears here real quick. You, of course, are obviously a well-known pioneer in workplace retirement plan litigation. Beyond the fiduciary rule, I'm wondering what some of the other issues keeping you busy these days. I know one of them is plan sponsors allowing record keepers to use personal information about participants to sell products and services outside the plan. What's the latest here?
That's currently the subject of litigation that we have. We've had some settlements that have incorporated into reform of the plan that provision. That is, that the sponsor will not allow that to be done. And our position is that it is an absolute fiduciary breach to allow a record keeper whose access to confidential financial information of the highest sensitivity, from social security numbers to assets they have available to investment choices to years till retirement, that is obtained in the role of record keeper, Brian, and for that purpose only. But to then take that information and use it to then recommend especially to the people with higher levels of assets, wealth management or IRAs or insurance products, is a fiduciary breach. And now, under the new rule, it will be a fiduciary breach. We've been fighting that battle before this rule came into effect and continue to fight that battle. But it's certainly an abuse, and participants don't know it's being done and would assume that that confidential financial information is not going to be used to benefit someone else. other than themselves.
Well, this has been very helpful. Jerry Schlichter, managing partner with Schlichter Bogard LLC. Thanks for sharing your insights today with us on the 401k Specialist podcast.
Thanks for your interest, Brian.
Let's face it, retirement planning can be confusing. At Jackson, we're working to make retirement clear for everyone, starting with you. Our easy-to-understand resources and user-friendly digital tools help simplify your entire experience. You can have confidence in your retirement with clarity from Jackson. Seek that clarity you deserve at jackson.com. Jackson is short for Jackson Financial Incorporated, Jackson National Life Insurance Company, Lansing, Michigan, and Jackson National Life Insurance Company of New York, Purchase, New York.